Welcome to live stream number 126. My name is Lars Christensen, and thank you so much for taking the time to join today's live stream. Today is all about CAM within Fusion 360. So if you don't care about CAM, it's okay, man. Just take the night off. We're gonna talk about CAM stock setup for the win. This is a repeat of last Thursday's. Had some technical difficulties. I had to abandon the live stream. So we're gonna try to make up for that today. That just gave me a week to better prepare for today's topic. So before I do that though, can I just give a plug, not to a sponsor, but to my good friend, John Saunders over at NYCNC. If you haven't already, go and check out his new website, nycnc.com. You probably know him from the YouTube channel, but go to NYCNC if you haven't been over there, and check out some of the stuff that John had been working over here. A ton of videos. It's all good stuff. I can't say enough good things about John. So definitely go and check out his stuff. Wearing his shirt today, just to make sure that I match the screen. So he's an awesome dude. Check it out. Okay, so let's get into Fusion here. Thank you, John. And talk about this part here that we talked a little bit about last Thursday. But like I said, now I have had a week to prepare. So as long as we don't have any technical difficulties, then we're on. So what we're going to talk about is stock setup for your CAM parts. But I enjoy taking parts that I have actually machined myself in the past and worked on. This was a part that I did a long time ago, but it's like a military part. It was literally a sensor going inside of this hole here, being mounted by two screws, and then it was kind of like located with this little tab here inside of another plate, and then there was a hole going inside of there for some wires. This was not the most accurate part that I ever made. It was actually kind of loose in tolerance, but the order was to only make about 8 of these. And that's why I want to talk a little bit about this. It's kind of like, how are you going into to approach a job like this? Now, you will see that I have some colors on here, and that is on purpose. There's a trick I learned by a guy named Don Coleman, also nicknamed in the Rochester, New York area as 210 Coleman, if you know him. And this is a little tip. If you agree with your other colleagues about colors on models, this can give you a really good feedback. So in this case here, green means finished parts. Blue means not so accurate, and red means that that's the most critical of the part. So this is a little tip that I definitely, especially if you're working in a shop where you have a couple of guys working together, if you can agree on something like a color pattern, can really, really help you a lot. So when I did these parts here, this was one of the things I wanted to talk about just quick. Most of the times when we're talking milling, we're always thinking about, we're going to we get raw stock, we're going to mill it first, and then maybe afterwards leave a little bit of material to maybe go in on a wet grinder or something like that, and then finish it off. And you would definitely do that if this was a very, very accurate part. You will mill out, for example, the opening here, and then you will grind on each side in a wet grinder to fit it in. But if it's not so accurate, plus or minus a couple of thousands, consider, if it's a small amount, to actually grind them to size first. If you can get away with it, it just makes it a lot easier set up in the mill. So 2 things. Colors can mean something, make it extremely easy to hand work over to somebody else. And then the little tip about, if you can, grind your parts in before you set them in the middle can make it a lot easier in the middle. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the setup here, because that's where that's what we're going for with the setup. The reason I'm talking about this is that if you're going in to create a setup, and we're gonna have two setups with this part. So the first setup is going, in my case here, is going to be most of the operation. Then there's going to be a second setup with the last operation. I'm going to talk about those in a second. But if we go in and say new setup, click on a new setup. I'm just going to say upset a third setup just for demonstrations. There's a couple of things you should be aware of. First of all, we get the gnomon, right? That should be the first thing you set. Don't worry about the stock just yet, because the gnomon actually directs where stock's going to go. What I mean by that, and I hope I'm not too confusing, if we go over and click on stock, you will see that it goes to relative size box, but you will see that stock size offset is set to 1 millimeter, stock top offset is set to 1 millimeter, stock bottom is set to 0. So 1 and 0, what means that if we go and look at the right view on this part, right here, you will actually see that there's no stock on the bottom, right? Because that's set here, but there is stock on the top. But this is not what I want to be my first operation, because honestly, nothing is happening over on that side. So what I'm trying to say is don't go in and start adjusting anything in here until you have set that gnomon. So that's kind of like rule number 1, I guess. My first operation up here, let me just cancel out of this. My first operation, if you right click and hit edit, you will see is this top face here. Because what is in red, I can attack on the first operation. And that's where I attack that. And you will see that when I go into stock here, I'm actually not using relative size box. I'm using fixed size box. So why am I using fixed size and not relative like the default? Well, and this is just the 99% time of the thing. My rule is, and this is just my personal rule, and don't take that for more than it's worth, please. My rule is relative size stock, the default, where it's just adding a little bit of material around your part. That is great if you don't know exactly what your stock size is yet. But if you know what stock size you have, if you have the stock, you should put a couple of verniers on it and measure it. Then I would say that you should go ahead and use the fixed size box. Be aware of that by default, also round up to nearest is set to 10 millimeters. Just leave that at 0. So that's the first, like my little rule here is we have the relative size box. What is the default? If you don't have the stock by hand, I'll recommend you use that. But if you do have the stock, use the fixed size box. Make sure you get the right values in there. Now, so the first setup, as you can see here, sets the z-axis. It actually plays kind of like down here. Then there's the second setup to create this little hole for the wires and to clean up the backside of this little tab here. So we have 2 setups on this model. Now, if you ever watch a lot of my videos, you will actually see that I have a setup something like this, where I have multiple vices, and you will see here that I actually do have that setup in this order. Operation 1 to the left and operation 2 to the right. But I want to make a point that though that I think it's a great idea many times to put things in a vise, if you kind of know, you're not going to have any collisions or anything like that, I would not spend the time of putting everything in a vise and programming like that. What I would do is I would do what I did here, just bring the part in, and then I would program my first setup and have all those operations, and create another setup that will be on this operation. And if you're like, whoa, I don't even know what a setup is, then I have other videos for that. That's not what I want to cover tonight. But what you then will do is most likely go back to our layout here. You maybe will call this one G54 and this one G55. And I will just go in here to my setup, go in and edit the first setup, making sure on the post-processing tab, I have this either at 0 or 1. That does the same thing, G54. And the second setup, right click on that, hit edit, and go in here, and then that would be number 2. Because that would actually make, when I post the code out, number 2 would actually give me a G55. And now I gotta regenerate these operations. Let me just do that. So this is how I would program the part. Create one setup down here, and if I kind of like go through that, just hide the tail, you will see an operation where it's gonna spot the holes. Of course, the part will kind of like sit like this, and then it will go through here and rough this hole out, finish this hole up here, and then it will rough the outside here, finish the bottom, and finish the side, finish that side, clear some corners, drill some holes, and in the end of this live stream, I can go kind of like through what I did here. But this will kind of like be operation 1, and then on the second vise, flip it over here, I would go ahead and just run that operation, but we'll actually kind of like face off, use the adaptive clearing to kind of like face off the top, and then do the bottom pocket hole here. Okay. Now, so that's the first step I want to kind of like talk about in the setup. Make sure that you set your gnomon first before you mess with the stock. If you know the stock sizes, use fixed size box. You only use relative if you don't know what you got. Now, when it comes to creating stocks for second operations, and this is kind of why I wanted to use this part, is because in this part here, I wouldn't have to create stock for second operation. The reason is if I go up and I select these two operations and I say simulate, and let's turn the stock on, and I normally find the wall paint works the best for kind of like these live streams here. If we go to the beginning, oops, gotta select both of them, hang on. Select both of them. If we go to the beginning here, we are getting everything set up the way we kind of like want it. In the case, if I speed up here, first operation, it's gonna tap the holes here, right? That will be the first operation. And then the second operation will show me, with that tab and everything. And that's one of the advantages of programming everything in one part like this. So we can actually go in here, we can see the end mill kind of like break through right in here, and we can kind of make sure that everything looks good. This is one of the advantages by just doing everything within one part versus when you start setting things up like this. And I've done live streams on these things, and I will definitely refer you to those. Send me an email, lars.christensen@autodesk.com. But I still wanted to show you, though, how you can save out stock and reuse it in multiple operations. So if I go back to my first setup and only run the first setup. So go ahead here and simulate this whole thing. So I'll just speed it up here, drill all these things out. First operation going really, really fast. Till the end here, right? This is first operation is done. Now here's the trick. If you go over and you right click in the white space, I'm in the simulation workspace. If I right click in this white space, you get a menu up here that is specific for CAM. And if you roll down to stock, in here you can say save stock. So I'm inside the simulation for first operation is done, and I hit save stock. and then it will save this out as an STL file. Now, I'm just going to throw this one right on my desktop here. So let's call it live stream stock. Save that here. Now this here is just a representation, an STL file created of whatever we cut away. Now, how do we now get that STL file back in to for our second operation so we can look at it? Here's the trick. Go to your model workspace, go to insert, and say insert mesh. That's the way you want to bring in that STL file. That's how it's going to come in, and you can now actually use it as a stock in the right size. Now also notice when it comes in here, it actually comes in with the move dialog on, so you can actually drag it over to a second operation. You could rotate it up or down. So if you go back and look at my model over here, you could, if we had programmed in here, we could move it over here and place it wherever we kind of want it. Let me just reinsert it again. Okay. So again, go to your model workspace, go to insert mesh. That's how you want to bring it in. And then you can move it in here if you got to bring it. Like I used to do a lot of tombstone machining, so you would move things from one to the other. That's how you can do that. I'm just going to hit OK to it here. And what you end up with, just so you know, is if you go into your workspace in here, you will actually have a mesh body in here. Now, so what you can do with that, if we go back to CAM, is that instead on the second setup, right click, hit edit. Instead of using fixed size stock like we just did on the first operation, we can now change that and say instead we want from a solid. And then we select from solid. So that's in the stock, in the setup for the second operation. From a solid, now select that mesh file that we brought in. You will see it actually tells you that it is a mesh. This stock in here is what is going to use for the simulation. So let me just regenerate that second operation again. And now if we simulate that second operation, you will see that the STL file is now the appropriate that we used, that we brought in. So that's one way that you can do this. Now I'm of course going to show you. Now I will show you the STL file in the background there in pink. So we could actually just turn it off. If we go up here, right from in the CAM browser, we can actually go and turn that mess off there. There we go. Hit play. So now we are actually cutting away that STL file that we brought in there. So I hope that some of you guys have been looking for this, and I know some people have had issues when they bring the STL file in. It's like huge, and that's because you didn't use the insert mesh. But I wanted to show you one other thing too that I many times use when it comes to create stock. So the way I just did let me just repeat that. By going in, I simulated the first operation, right? And when I had simulated that one to the end, I right-click in the white space, I hit stock, I saved stock, and I saved that STL file out to my desktop, and then I brought it in, go to the model workspace, go to insert mesh to bring that file in. That's perfectly okay. But what I actually also sometimes do is I have the original customer model, and just to be quite honest, sometimes what I do is just go up to the body that the customer provided you, and you can literally do a Control-C, Control-V, and that will give you a copy of that body, and just hit OK, don't move it. hide the customer's original body. So now this is my body. And remember that inside of Fusion, there is a lot of great tools. If we, for example, go in here, we can select all these holes because they're going to be created by the second operation. We can click on these, and if I hit delete on my keyboard, looks what happens to the hole. It disappears, right? And then I could also go in here and just quickly open up a sketch and maybe create some kind of a rectangle, 2-point rectangle, like this here, and then use collinear to make this one and this one, and then a good old press pull Q, and we could do up to this surface right there, and that would kind of like be the same stock that I had. Well, actually, I think my cutter went a little bit deeper, but that would kind of like be the same as my other one. So now I have two bodies. Body one was the original one the customer sent, and here's my little modified one that I just did. And just like before, I could go into Cam, go into the second setup, edit it, go into the stock, and instead of selecting the mesh, I could now select that body number 4 that I just created. And again, when I go, let me just go over here, turn body 4 off, turn body 1, the customer model, back on. And now if I regenerate that and simulate this, we will see we get the same kind of result, right? Now it was just a solid body that I quickly copy paste, created a couple of features, and got the same output as saving the STL stock right there. So that is how I normally work with stock inside of Fusion 360. I hope that this is somewhat helpful for you guys to kind of like see how I approach when it comes to the stock setup in here. So first of all, like I said, on your shop, if you can get into color coordination between you guys on the shop floor, that can really, especially when like somebody's sick or something like that, it's just nice if you already know that green means finished. You go in there, oh yeah, that's all good. What is the critical dimensions? Well, everything in red, and everybody's kind of like on the same page. And I really would recommend, just as a good rule, if you have the stock in the shop, measure it, put it in here so you have the right numbers instead of messing around with the relative size box and trying to add material to the sides. Like I said, this is fine if you don't know what stock size you have, but if you know what is going to come in, you should measure it and put it in here. And I also just wanted to make sure that I make it clear that Lars don't always put everything inside of vices and align it all up and things like that. Something like this part here, like I said, I had to make 8 of them. It was a quick whip it out, put all your toolpath within one part, and 1, 2, 3, be done with it. So with that was kind of like what I planned on showing. Now I did want to just have a 2 seconds, because I can see we guys still got a little bit of time, talking about a couple of small tips as with a part like this. First of all, when you look at my setup for setup 1, notice how I started programming this part first, or this side first, because that was where I could attack this outside and the hole that was kind of like accurate. Notice how I rotated my Y, so when you look on the part here, that the little tab was easy accessible. I think I've seen many people who would put that tab at the back end. That's kind of hard when you're leaning in the machine if you can't measure it. So think about that. Place the tab. You could also place it in the front, somewhere where you easily could put a pair of verniers on it. Don't make it harder for yourself than you can, or you have to. Another thing I did when I programmed this part that I wanted to point out is that I actually drilled out the internal corners here. We had a talk a while back about that in another live stream, to actually drill out the internal corners, and especially because this pocket was so deep, I knew I would get a lot of chatter. You will actually also see here that I am going to drill the center hole out here too. Again, so here you see the drill. It's just drilling out these corners, and that was because the customer didn't have, high expectations to the finish. I can kind of like get away with it. If you have a customer who is going to inspect your part really carefully, maybe you wouldn't do this. But these pockets was pretty dang deep, so I knew I would get a lot of chatter with the end mill. Like I said, in this case here, I also drilled out the center, but I used adaptive to rough all the material out. And be aware of that in adaptive, if you right click and go in and edit adaptive, be aware on the last tab that you can actually set a pre-drill position all the way on the last tab. So I just selected a point here, so my adaptive wouldn't helix down, but it will start where that hole had been drilled. So you can see this is the end mill. That was the hole that was drilled. When I started here, it goes straight into that hole, and that's where the adaptive starts from. So just so you are aware of that. You can actually see it's leaving a little bit of material on the sides here. It goes over to rough the outside here. Use the adaptive for that, and then come in and finishing up the bottom. That's a pocket operation. It's hard to see. Use a 2D pocket to finish the bottom. And what I do when I finish a bottom operation, so just finishing the bottom, you will actually see if I go in and edit it, and I go into passes tab, I actually leave a 0.5 millimeter on the side because I just want to finish the bottom at this point. I don't want the cutter to touch the side. So I actually leave a little material on the side. So I know the cutter is only doing the bottom finish, because the next operation is the contour, and that contour will then finish the wall. So that's how I have always broken things down. I don't know if that's helpful for anybody, but I will rough everything out, then I will do a 2D pocket to finish the bottom with a side offset on, and then I will come in with a contour operation to finish off the side of the walls. That way you're separating the depth of the pocket operation with the sides, and then going here and finishing this wall. And then I actually used the rest machining operation to go in and clear out, because the cutter should be a lot smaller there. So if you're not familiar with that, we're going to do a live stream on this. Fusion do have rest machining in here, so that was kind of like how I finished that. And then the last thing I did was tapping it. So I hope that this was somewhat, I hope this is helpful. Yeah, I think that was what I had planned on showing here. Now, there's nothing wrong. I don't want to say that anything is wrong by setting it up like this. And I actually just did a live stream recently where I did have multiple parts in different places, and we talked about G54 and G55. So if you are interested in getting information about that, send me an email. My email address is down in the description area, lars.christensen@autodesk.com. All right, guys. That was about what I had planned on this Thursday evening, February 8th. I hope that this was useful. We'll be back again on Tuesday with some more Fusion live stream. I think we're going to talk about how to handle large assemblies inside of Fusion 360. That could be an interesting topic. I'm going to do what I normally do. I'm going to end the broadcast. So if you're watching the recording, thank you so much for taking the time. Do me a favor, thumbs up if you like this. If this was not useful, if this was stupid, thumbs down. Be absolutely honest. And yeah, thank you for watching that. And I'm going to jump into the live stream and say hi to everybody. Thank you so much, guys. Hope you have an awesome weekend, and I hope to see you Tuesday. Take care.